Thank you very much, Rhea. Now, it means so much to me to present the Canadian Jewish Literary Award in Yiddish to In the Land of the Postscript, the complete short stories of Chava Rosenfarb, which was translated by her daughter, Goldie Morgentaler. This is the first time that a complete selection of Chava Rosenfarb's short stories is available in English. The postscript in the title refers to the afterlife of Holocaust survivors in Montreal. The stories hit really close to home for me. My parents were survivors who settled in Montreal after the Shoah. My father was from Vilna and a stark Yiddishist. My mother was English and didn't speak a word of Yiddish when they escaped from the Nazis in France. When my family arrived in Montreal, they joined a vibrant Yiddish community, and my mother took Yiddish lessons from Chava Rosenfarb to be able to be part of her new life. For my father, the new life was a love of Yiddish books, which I've inherited from him. In 1954, as a leader with the Yiddish Volksbibliothek and the Vilna Verein, he invited Chaim Grada to Montreal to speak. He invited all the Montreal Yiddish writers to welcome Grada, including Chava Rosenfarb. It was recorded. And if you want to hear Chava Rosenfarb's beautiful Yiddish and my father's, check it out on the Yiddish Book Center's website. It's there. The award goes to the translator, Chava Rosenfarb's daughter. Goldie Morgentaler started translating her mother's work at the age of 13. Translation is an art. Goldie is a professor emerita of English literature at the University of Lethbridge and her mother's literary champion. And she has singular access and insight into the author, her language, and the intricacies of transforming the Yiddish sentences into English while maintaining the intense emotions and experiences they convey. The book is a masterpiece. And here's Goldie.
Can you hear me now? Koidem kol will ich danken dem Chava Edward Trapunski und die alle Mitglieder von der Kanada Jiddischer Bücherjury, was haben mir belohnt die dosige literarische Prämie. Es ist bei mir ein größer Kuvert. Ich wollte euch gewollt danken, White Goat Press, der Verlager von Chava Rosenfarbs Erzählungen. Die Prämie, was ich bekomme heint, ist eine Prämie für Übersetzen von Jiddisch auf Englisch, will ich tage sagen, ein paar Wörter legabe Übersetzung, weil das ist eine von den literarischen Unternehmungen, was bekommt nicht keine Sache der Herz und Anerkennung. Also wie meine Zeit zu reden ist eine begrenzte, hoffe ich, dass ihr wird mir möglich sein, was ich will jetzt rübergehen auf Englisch. I would like to thank Edward Trapunski and the other judges of the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards for the honor they confer on me today. I find it particularly moving that I'm receiving this award as a translator of my own mother's work into English. My mother was, as you heard, the Yiddish novelist, poet, and short story writer, Chava Rosenfarb. In the Land of the Postscript is the title of a collection of Chava's short stories. The stories deal with the afterlives of Holocaust survivors in Montreal, where Chava lived for most of her life. Thus, Canada is, as the title suggests, the land of the postscript, where the survivors of the Holocaust, like Chava herself, lived out the remainder of their lives. The stories in the collection were originally published in Yiddish, so I am particularly grateful to the committee for singling out translation for this award. Translation has traditionally been the unloved stepchild in the field of literary activity. And yet, because no reader can possibly know every language, translation opens up the world and makes possible interactions with the world's writers, not just those whose languages we know. But while it serves as a bridge between cultures, translation is especially important for the preservation of languages like Yiddish that have lost most of their speakers and are only accessible to a limited number of readers. It has been the particular tragedy of writers in Yiddish that not only has their readership diminished, but their own children and grandchildren often cannot read their work. Translation is thus the only means of rescue. My mother, Chava Rosenfarb, wrote 3 multi-volume novels, many short stories and essays, and published 4 books of poetry. Yet without translation, most of these works, the product of her lifetime as a writer, would be lost. Translation, some of which she did herself, was her lifeline. It was her literary future. There is a saying that things get lost in translation. There is some truth to that, but things also get found. The greater truth is that without translation, some things would get totally, irredeemably lost. Translation is the most optimistic of literary endeavors because it suggests that everything may be transposed. Even idioms and phrases and sayings that have no equivalent in other languages can, in one approximation or another, be somehow transmuted so that those who speak an entirely different language and belong to an entirely different culture may nevertheless understand each other through the medium of translation. I've often been asked, what are the hardest things to convey when going from Yiddish to English? I would say that it is the emotionality of the language. Yiddish is a language of overstatement, of highly charged emotion. Translated into English, this kind of emotion sometimes appears overwrought, too much of a good thing, too sentimental. For instance, English frowns on redundancy. Yiddish thrives on it. Nobody ever cries, just cries. In Yiddish, they cry with tears, they cry out their eyes, they cry so that a ship, so as to sink a ship with sour milk. Curses are never short and cutting in Yiddish. They are long, involved, and often very funny. The curse is deliberately made fantastical because it is never meant to come true. So, for instance, I'll just give you one curse. May a thunder enter you through the ears. It should then polish your intestines until they shine and leave through your feet, after which you should swallow an umbrella and it should open inside you. Yiddish may also appear very sentimental to non-Yiddish speakers because so many degrees of diminutive and endearment are possible. Both English and French are relatively poor in their use of the diminutive, which in these languages is generally formed by adding the word little to, or its synonyms, to the noun. But Yiddish, like the Slavic and Germanic languages, makes it diminutive by changing the form of the word itself. And several levels of diminishment are possible, which may convey several nuances of meaning. For instance, Katz in Yiddish is a cat. Ketzel is a smaller cat. Ketzele is even smaller, a kitten. Ketzishi is still a kitten, but used as an endearment for a person. Ketzinyu and Ketzunka are other possible variations. So I share this award with gratitude with all translators for making the literature of the world available to me and to all peoples of the world, no matter what language they speak. Because I do believe that literature is the primary way in which we can come to understand one another. When translators sit down to their work, they are engaged in more than mere transposing of thoughts and phrases from one language into another. Sometimes, as in the case of Yiddish, there is much more at stake. My mother once wrote, and this is a quote, that if writing is a lonely profession, then the Yiddish writer's loneliness has an added dimension. Her readership has perished. Her language has gone up with the smoke of the crematoria. She creates in a vacuum, almost without a readership, out of fidelity to a vanished language, as if to prove that Nazism did not succeed in extinguishing that language's last breath, that it is still alive. That's the end of the quote. Translators from threatened languages like Yiddish are engaged in snatching from the jaws of oblivion that which is in danger of being swallowed whole by the present. Translation is a most honorable calling. It is the preservation of the past in the present, of one language in another. Translation allows literary works to exist in languages where they never existed before. I thank all translators for their work and for having devoted their lives to breaking down the barriers that separate us, thus alleviating the curse of the Tower of Babel. Thank you very much.